Hi again, this is Stu Stover. Today I wanted to get into the question of negotiations. And so in the old days, we had big factories, thousands and thousands of employees working for big corporations across America. So it wasn't just us in Michigan with General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, or IBM, or pick a big organization that had thousands and thousands of employees. I actually worked for a while teaching some classes in some of the Ford GM plants. When I was there in the 70s and 80s, or 80s actually, it was not uncommon to have 10,000 employees in one plant, all working their itty-bitty little job on the assembly line and moving through the process and, you know, all that crazy stuff. Today's world, you could probably produce the same quantity of good with 100 employees with the kind of technology we have today and all the issues with that. And so part of this whole notion of negotiations is we started with the premise that the workplace is adversarial. The management, and particularly the front level management, was adversarial against the workers, trying to force them into compliance, do the job the correct way, follow the process, not process as we think of it today, but do the task of the job. And obviously people don't always like being told how to manage their work life like that. And so there was a very, very adversarial system. And there's a ton of examples I could give you. My grandfather worked in some of the factories in Detroit in World War II when we were trying to build the tanks and the planes and everything else for World War II. And he said there was as much of a war going on in the plant as there was overseas. So what they had in his particular plant, they had a walkway around the top of the plant so the supervisors could walk around there and watch and make sure everybody was doing it the right way. And periodically the workers would remove a section of the walkway and put the rubber mat back over, and then the supervisor would fall through. People got knocked down elevator shafts. There were fights. And in many arenas, or many companies in that 40s period, you had the biggest, toughest guy became the first level supervisor, and he was going to force compliance one way or the other. And actually I had a guy tell me that in his company that was still the case in the 80s and even early 90s, that there was a very physical intimidation approach to that. And so is it any wonder that the union movement sprang into being? Because not only did you have this very, very unpleasant work environment and very unpleasant supervisors and all this stuff, but you also had a scenario where you had companies that if they couldn't sell their product in the marketplace, they would lower the price. Okay, it's not uncommon to think in those terms. That's kind of supply and demand stuff. But the reality was that they would then turn around and pay the worker less because they were making less money selling those products. So you get to the pay window on Friday, they put the money in your hand and you go, what's this? Oh, we had to cut your pay because we were having problems selling our product in the market. And so you had unsafe work conditions, you had long hours, you had no overtime, no protections in the workplace. Very, very cavalier kinds of stuff. So that 1930s, 1940s, okay, so 1930, I forget what year it was, the Labor Relations Act was passed by Congress to give workers some degree of protection and to give unions some degree of protection. Okay, all right. So how does this relate to negotiations? Well, what was going on is every negotiation the union would have with management was very unpleasant, very. And lots of issues that would show up with that in terms of why it was adversarial. So it was the culture of the organization, it was the managerial philosophy, it was all sorts of things that were coming together. And it made it very difficult to get deals done. So you were arguing over positions. And so one of the things that we want to look at here is a U of M guy, a couple guys actually, wrote a book called Getting to Yes. And they said that adversarial system was fatally flawed. It's not the way to move the organization forward. It's not the way to resolve issues across the organization. Terrible stuff. And so he argued for a very, very different approach to this stuff. And I'm not going to get into the details of how the book Getting to Yes changes the game and does that. You can do that kind of stuff in class. But I wanted to create the framework so that you understood why this is so important. And so the guy who wrote the book, I'm blanking on his name off the top of my head, but he talked about a values-based approach. So you're talking about the things that we share in common. What do we have that we already agree on? And let's not focus on all the things we disagree on initially. Let's just focus on the things that we do agree on. And so the idea is that both management and hourly share the same bed. So why are they in such negative environments where they're just beating on each other in some fashion? So let me give you a couple examples. So it was not uncommon to schedule a meeting and either management or hourly would be 20 minutes late. And they'd come barging in and sit down and change stuff around and just with the intention of getting the other side off their game. Great. So it's not collaborative, it's, yes, unpleasant. One guy told me at a Ford plant that when he was doing negotiations, he'd always walk into the meeting with a big nasty cigar and start blowing that nasty smoke around the room. Sometimes you'd have a room set up so management had chairs but hourly didn't. And so doing all kinds of things to irritate the other side with the intention of them somehow or other getting a better deal, whatever the deal was. And let me do a little bit on the international side, because the international side also creates a flavor to this as well too. So at the end of the Korean conflict, okay, so we got to have a peace treaty. Now, guys, we never signed a peace treaty, so there is technically still a Korean conflict going on today, although, I mean, it's obviously not they're shooting each other every day, but it never officially ended. Well, what was the deal? So we were pretty naive when we went into those negotiations. And so what they had a table that was here. They, North Koreans, sat here. We were down a level. Is it easy to have a negotiation when one's up and one's down? No. They had their flags higher than our flags. Our chairs typically wobbled where theirs were good chairs. I mean, they went through a whole bunch of strategies to try and intimidate us Americans and get us off our game so that hopefully they would get a better deal in the peace treaty. It's one of the reasons that when Vietnam ended, we had a Paris peace treaty. And we spent literally years negotiating tables, chairs, lighting, heat, all the stuff, because we had experienced being a little naive about that stuff in Korea. So when Vietnam happened, frankly, it was stupid. So it had nothing to do with, getting to an agreement. It was space saving. It was all sorts of other stuff. It was really crazy. And so all I'm saying is this book gives us a different perspective that is, in my opinion, far healthier than the old system. And for whatever reason, we still got lots of people who want to play by these rules, adversarial and intimidation and imposing their will, which is crazy stuff. One other example I will give you. I was on a school board one time. School board means I'm part of management. And so at any turn, it seemed like we were negotiating with one group or another in the school system, whether it was teachers, principals, the bus drivers, the janitorial staff, the food service, we were always negotiating. My superintendent and most of the principals were in this adversarial mindset. It's always trying to figure out how to beat them down and give them a lower raise and give them, less, whatever the deal was. And so I'm sitting there at one of these meetings, I'm on management side, and I'm not comfortable with sort of our philosophy, how we're doing this. And one of the teachers spoke up. He was their spokesperson, and he said, we don't have much money this year, so we don't expect a lot of raises. And I could sense my guys on my side going, oh, we've already won. They gave up the ship before we even started. And I'm kind of going, wait a minute, what's going on here? And so he went on to say, what we would like is we would like to be treated like professionals. Okay. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, what does that mean? And they went on to say that they are required to punch in every morning, and if they don't punch in by a certain time, they get dinged for this problem or that problem, and whatever the deal was. But consequences if they didn't hit the time clock at the correct time. And they said, doctors, nurses, you guys, principals, whatever, you're professionals, you don't have a clock. It's dumb to have a clock. Well, in the old system, clocks were really important for a whole host of reasons, which we're not going to get into right now. But he said, we want to be treated as professionals. So what did we do? We said, break. And so the two groups went off and discussed among themselves what this guy had said. We went, yes, we won. And he said, we can give them no clock. And I went, oh, good. So we're talking about the values that we have for being in the workplace. Okay. So we walked in there and they said, yep, we can get rid of the clock, not a problem. But you still have to be there at the same time and there will still be consequences. And I'm going, what? So we took away, we took away what they really wanted, to be treated and valued as a significant member of the team, and sharing the bed and common values, all of that stuff. We took all that stuff away almost immediately. And you can guess what happened as we went through further negotiations, further meetings. We ended up going back arguing about positions. Are you going to pay us 2.5% a year or 2.25% a year? And we ended up talking about money. And so we went away from the possibility of creating a win-win to creating a win-lose. I don't know about you, but I don't like being in win-lose situations because by definition, pretty good chance I'm going to be on the other side of that. I'm going to lose. Now, what are the consequences for your organization when we play this game? The consequences for your organization are pretty significant. Who has to carry out the work of the organization? It's not the upper management. It's the workers. And so if we hack them off in some way, what good things are likely to happen down the road? And so I would argue there's very good reasons for us to get very comfortable with the approach of getting to yes, and understand that when you guys get into the workplace, you're going to have to be dealing with some of this kind of negotiation. It happens right now for you guys anyway, but this is important stuff, and we should pay attention to how to do it with integrity, authenticity, and values based. Thank you very much.